Chapter 10 is about the component cost of capital and how each of those components contribute to the overall cost for any business. And whenever we talk about cost in this chapter and going forward about money, the rate of interest or discount rate or the opportunity cost. So the three component costs of capital, and I'm typing in Microsoft Excel, are component costs of capital include debt, preferred stock, equity. And I use common equity instead of common stock because common equity actually does include your retained earnings, which belongs to the common, as well as common stock. As you look at the chapter, each one of the times that it's talking about computing these, what it's talking about is what would the cost be for each component going forward. And so you'll probably see a test question or other question in the chapter that talk about what about the historic cost. In other words, can I go back to the balance sheet and take a look at the numbers in debt, preferred stock, and common equity and compute the amount of cost for the company? The answer to that, no. What you have to do is you have to look at what's the cost today. So just as a starting point here, I'm going to plug in some numbers, and let's say that this company operates $200,000 worth of debt, $100,000 worth of preferred stock, and common equity worth $500,000. And I'm going to get rid of the two components and not worry right now about breaking these down. So we'll just delete those. First thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to, and so if I go to my home page, I'm going to use an underline, and then I'm going to come down here to get the total from, and I'm going to use the summation mark, which is to your far right side. And it's going to add them up, and it says that we have $800,000 in total of equity. So the next thing that I want to know is what percentage each of the different components makes up of our total capital. Debt would be equal to the $200,000, and we would divide it then by the total amount of capital of $800,000. Clicking on your F4 button, you make the $800,000 an absolute reference in Excel, which is helpful because you don't have to keep typing it. You always want it to go back and grab the $800,000. So debt represents 25%, and preferred stock again is equal to $100,000 divided by B16. Again, I'm going to use F4. And what I could have done instead to find that 12.5% was simply to drag down. So I had the formula here, and if I just drug it down into the next one by grabbing the square on the far right corner and pulling down, it would have found the 12.5%. And so we do the same thing then for common equity. And if I go back up here on my home and I make those look like this, and I give them a kiss, we can see debt represents 25, preferred stock 12.5, and common equity 62.5. So that's the weighting part of your weighted average cost of capital. And then the second part that you need to know then is the cost of each of those components. And for now, I'm just going to put a cost in. So we'll say the cost of debt is 8%. The cost of preferred stock, we'll say, is 9.5%. Common equity is 11%. Okay. The only one of these that are adjusted for taxes is debt, because debt is tax deductible. So we need to make one adjustment in here, and I'm going to call this A/T for after-tax cost. And so the next we need to know is what is the tax rate. So we'll say the tax rate, we very commonly use 40%. So 1 minus the tax rate is, you'll see this in your book, 1 minus T is 60%. Because percent deduction on the cost of debt, it really only costs you 60%. So our after-tax cost is going to equal the 8%, which I just gave you, don't worry about where it comes from right now, and multiply it times 1 minus the tax rate, or the 60%. And so the cost of debt is only 4%. 0.8%. For preferred stock and common stock, again, no adjustment. So it is what it is. We'll talk later about adjusting particularly common stock for flotation costs, but also somewhat preferred stock can happen as well. So then we want to know what the weight times cost is, oops, for each of the components. So we make the cell equal the weight, which is 25%, times the after-tax cost of 4%. And so debt represents 1.2% all in that weighted cost. And again, I can same thing here, 12.5% times 9.5 and 62.5% times the 11%. But since the formula is already set, I can just go to the lower right hand corner, turn it across, click on your left mouse button and jump. Okay, so then repeat some of it. So again, I'm going to use the underline, and then I'm going to come down here, and on the home menu, I'm going to ask it to sum those up. So for this particular firm, the weighted average cost of capital is 9.63%. Let's use abbreviate that WACC. So that's the overview of what the chapter is trying to get you to do, and then there's a few more things that we'll finesse, and I will put up some more video to do those.